This is the Regained Wellness Podcast with Jamie Logie, episode 150, Coca-Cola and their corruption of the nutrition industry. Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jamie Logie. I run regainedwellness.com, and today it brings to you the Regained Wellness Podcast of the same name. So thanks for coming on out. And this is a show I always have my episodes planned out way far in advance, and I record a lot of them beforehand and just have them all ready to go. So this is something that only came up in the last few days, and it's that insights into how big companies influence, in this case with nutrition, influence a lot of the research that goes into any reports you see where they're, in this case, like regarding sugar, and you see these odd things like, oh, maybe sugar's not as bad as they say, or you read things on artificial sweeteners or aspartame, and there's studies that say it's not that bad. And when you look a little deeper, you start seeing that the companies that have the interest in these things today, in this situation, talking about Coca-Cola, they're the ones who are funding and behind a lot of the research that's in their best interest. And this is a whole article and kind of research that was unveiled. I mean, people know about this sort of thing. This article puts a little more insight into specifically what Coca-Cola has done. So that's the focus on this whole show, which I've just find very interesting, and I think it's worth sharing this info if you haven't seen it already. So before we start, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. This is my run-of-the-mill generic subscribe to the show on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever you find podcasts. And okay, that's out of the way, so let's get right to it. Okay, so the focus of this whole episode comes from an article and report from healthnewsreview.org and a reporter named Kathleen Stone on that whole issue of how there's been internal documents that show Cokes had profits in mind when they funded their nutrition, unquote, science. And like I said, this is nothing new. I mean, this goes back to the tobacco industry and into the 50s and 60s, and whenever you would see reports on tobacco not being so bad, or the health effects aren't what the mainstream media is saying, and a lot of these studies were funded by the big tobacco companies. So it's nothing new, but it's still been happening a lot, but it's a lot more discreet now. And like I said, big ones are specifically like aspartame, sucralose, any of the artificial sweeteners, high fructose corn syrup. There'll be the odd study you'll see that's showing, or a report you'll see in like a paper or online or a magazine or whatever. It's like, oh, it's, artificial sweeteners maybe aren't all that bad. And when you dig a little deeper, you see it's funded by companies like Monsanto or JD Searle, or people that have, a vested interest in selling a lot of this crap. And it's a lot of legit science. Like if I'm researching articles or podcasts, I'm not looking for sources like Men's Health magazine or Muscle and Fitness. No disrespect to those, but not exactly the groundbreaking science. Even if they do reference it, the best places online are like the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition and probably PubMed, which is the big online resource for all like legitimate science and research and whatever. The problem is these big companies are able to buy and pay off their own doctors and research teams and whatnot. And then these published articles show up on these legitimate sites where you can kind of curate all this different nutrition information and stuff like that. And, it's actual science, it's actual studies, but it's, funded by people trying to get them to already find the answers that they've, had their minds made up on. And a lot of the times it's a lot of cover up, such a conspiracy word, but they, they'll fund different organizations with completely different names, so they show no connection to, someone like Coke or Monsanto or whatever. But if you go on these sites like PubMed, this not long ago I was doing this. I think it was something with aspartame or whatever. Might have been even something like with Gatorade and artificial sweeteners or colors or whatever. So you look and you see the research, and it's legitimate scientists and whatever. And then you look at the source, and then you can go to that, and then you can kind of backtrack through the articles, and you can look and see, okay, where was this study conducted? And then you see it's at whatever university, and then you see what part of the university was it conducted at, and then you'll see it might be this specific wing or branch of the university, and then you see where that branch or division of the university comes from, and then you look back and it's like, oh, it's owned by Nestle, and then you can kind of always, it's kind of the rabbit hole of finding the original source on who's looking to share information that's more in their best interest. So it's a lot of these things when you see, like, oh, maybe trans fats aren't that bad, have a little bit of a deeper look and you'll see. So with this, it's specifically Coca-Cola. And so getting into the article, there's been 2 new academic articles published this month. So what are we in here? We just started April, but this came from March 2018 about fresh insights into how Coca-Cola fueled its corporate interest through a front group and abused, accepted transparency practices through a lot of sketchy disclosure of clinical trials, conflicts of interest. So this is it going like way deeper. When I mentioned that Nestle thing, that was, pretty cut and dry. It was easy to trace back. This goes a lot deeper. So this goes to a report published in the Journal of Epidemiology, I can never say that, and Community Health, so the JECH. Coca-Cola's officials' own words established that their intent in funding the Global Energy Balance Network, I don't know if anyone's seen that before, the GEBN, and it's about, how people should be able to balance calories, and calories in are the same as calories out, which is one of the most misleading things anyone or any corporation can say. So they created this Global Energy Balance Network. It's a nonprofit organization nominally devoted to promoting education and science. And ultimately, this was kind of a front to promote their own bottom line. So internal Coca-Cola documents show that the company sought to portray GEBN, that Global Energy Balance Network, as an honest broker in the whole obesity debate. And they wanted to use it to kind of reframe that discussion on the causes of obesity. They wanted to, people know to avoid refined carbohydrates and sugars and, the calorie issue and whatever. So what Coke wanted to do was kind of flip the discussion on its head and say, oh no, anything you eat, as long as it's balanced, will, leave your body the same way. And they're trying to create this organization that would say, 50 calories worth of almonds is the same as 50 calories worth of Coke, which could not be further from the truth. Some foods have more of a hormonal impact on the body and some don't. So all calories are not equal at all. And, say in the case of almonds, you've got protein, you've got fat, you've got fiber. They're slow digesting. They don't cause massive blood sugar spikes. They're going to keep you fuller longer. And to compare that to, say, 50 grams of sugar, whether it's refined sugar or in the case of like Coke or a soft drink, is completely different. When that stuff just goes through you, it's like rocket fuel, huge blood sugar spikes, crashes, lights up your brain. It's more addictive. It makes you hungrier. It's not going to fill you up. The crash is going to leave you lethargic, craving more. It's a whole mess. So they're creating these, like in this case, this organization, to sort of twist the info and share and promote more that, no, you just need this balance in calories and it doesn't matter what you eat, and Coca-Cola can have a place in that, which is hugely irresponsible. So this, this organization, and it was basically like a multifaceted campaign that lobbied, policymakers. They funded all these researchers. They ran all these clinical trials. And then they started to educate, in quotes, health journalists and bloggers and influential people about the energy balance concept. It's easy to reach out to someone with a huge following who's promoting, health and wellness, but maybe doesn't come from a good background, like fundamentally nutrition wise, maybe didn't go to school. These people can still be effective and help people, but they're maybe a little more influenced, and of course money talks, and easier to go after these people with these huge reaches compared to, a smaller legitimate, like an MD or a smaller practice or dietitian who's just doesn't have that reach. So they're targeting these health journalists and bloggers and really promoting this energy balance myth. And the GEBN's interpretation of that concept, is widely criticized as shifting blame for the obesity crisis away from Coke's signature sugary drinks. And I think they've done a little bit of a decent job of this, especially promoting that idea of moderation and that all these foods can be included and there are no bad foods, which is absolute garbage. There are very bad foods. And I saw an article on this the other day. I think it was in the Globe and Mail. That's a big newspaper in Toronto. And they're talking to certain nutritionists, and they're saying how it's dangerous that this healthy eating lifestyle is being promoted so much, this clean eating lifestyle. If you see like a lot of social media accounts, specifically Instagram, and people with these, clean eating, healthy, whether it's vegan or paleo or whatever, it's just they're promoting like the cleanest foods possible, and it's awesome, and the pictures look amazing, and it's motivational. And then you've got these nutritionists specifically in this article saying this is dangerous for people because the clean eating thing can overwhelm, create anxiety, and create this misbalance and bad sort of association with foods. And then foods start to get categorized into good and bad, and that none of these, there should be no good and bad foods. And this is absolute absurdity to say there's no such thing as bad foods. Sometimes people do need to be accountable, and they do need to be sort of called out to, be on top of their nutrition, their health and wellness, make the best choices possible. And you see crap like this where like there's no bad foods. So you could order an entire Taco Bell meal. I don't know why I'm picking on Taco Bell, but an entire bunch of foods that contain genetically modified sources, refined carbs, sugars, trans fats, artificial ingredients, just it's facsimile food. It's fake food. And now that I think of it, I probably should have looked more into that article, because now that there's possibility that the links with those nutritionists they're talking about how there's no good or bad foods might find its way back to something like this, like the Coke issue or other funding from big companies, whether they're fast food. McDonald's is notorious for this. They've done this for a long time. You see it everywhere where there's, even the idea that McDonald's can be healthy and part of whatever. They've been able to spend millions in the same situation like Coke has to kind of persuade people and nutritionists and doctors and whatnot. So now that I think of that article, maybe I should go back and see a little more from where that came from. It's ultimately that idea that they've really pushed moderation. And I did an entire episode on what I think is the myth of moderation, and that's a whole other tangent and I won't get into, but I'll link that show up. So I recommend listening to that, and I'll put that on the show notes. So for today, anything I talk about or references or other shows is regainedwellness.com/150. So you can, that's an interesting thing too, moderation, that I'd never totally explored. And now I see that it can have its dangers. So if you're interested, check that out. But ultimately, so we're looking at this, Coke is trying to divert the attention away from all their signature drinks or sugary drinks and whatever. And that Coca-Cola directly funded that GEBN, the Global Energy Balance Network, to the tune of around $1.5 million, with millions more distributed to GEBN affiliated academics to conduct research. So this disbanded in 2015, but before this, they've funded hundreds of what are now seen as completely sketchy and suspect clinical trials, like the same legit clinical trials that go behind other good research. So it's so hard for people, and I totally understand, to wade through all this stuff when you're bombarded left and right from what look like legitimate sources, and they actually are legitimate sources, but they're being, funded and persuaded to find conclusions that are in the best interests of Coca-Cola. So this is now basically thanks to what's called the State Freedom of Information request. This was made to the University of Colorado, a consumer and public health advocacy group called the U.S. Right to Know, or the USRTK, USRTK. I don't think it works as an acronym, but this group obtained the internal documents describing Coke's motivation for launching that GEBN. And so there's a guy, Gary Ruskin from the USRTK. He's a co-director, and together with public health and policy experts have described the content of those documents in that article and in other academic and scientific journals. So the key excerpts from the internal documents that this article is on, so this healthnewsreview.org, the key excerpts they found include a proposal for establishment of the Global Energy Balance Network sent by Coca-Cola's former chief science and health officer named Benita Applebaum, if you listen to Tribe Called Quest. Sorry, that's completely different. So in the memo, Applebaum used war analogies to describe the corporation's response to public health efforts to curb obesity. So this is from the report. So it says, there is a growing war between the public health community and private industry over how to reduce obesity. Sides are being chosen and battle lines are being drawn. The most extreme public health experts have gained traction with the media, with many policymakers, and with an increasing appropriation of the general public. So this Applebaum, the chief science and health officer, likened the GEBN to a political campaign and proposing that it develop, deploy, and evolve a powerful and multifaceted strategy to counter radical organizations and their proponents. So part of that multifaceted strategy was a program to, like I said before, educate journalists and bloggers and influencers about the Energy Balance campaign. And that's an initiative whose secret Coke sponsorship was originally uncovered by a journalist named Paul Thacker. And Applebaum said the covert PR program was generating significant interest from the journalists who participated. This is back to that document. So in 2012, the Anschutz Health and Wellness Center at the University of Colorado hosted a 3-day educational event for 20 of the leading health and wellness journalists in the country. The event was an enormous success, and the journalists were enthusiastic about the information they received about energy balance and wrote a large number of stories about their experience. And you've got to think there was a lot of, sort of closed door deals and whatever to get any of these articles in massive publications. So if you think, they don't even name specifically who these 20 of the leading health and wellness journalists in the country are, but you could probably backtrack and find it. And they're probably working for big publications like either the New York Times or USA Today, Washington Post, who knows? But they handpicked these people, and I'm sure it was worth their while attending and then writing about this whole energy balance thing, ultimately under the guise of Coca-Cola, trying to get, a little better public perception. So, and finally, the Coke executive referred to government regulations to tax or ban foods that are considered unhealthy as extreme solutions to the obesity problem. So I don't know if I'm sure you've seen this, and if you're living in the States, you're maybe a little more aware, whereas say like in New York City, they were trying to tax sugary soft drinks and they want to tax fast food. And the idea that, within 20 years, the potential diabetic rates in the country will be so high that there won't be enough money from taxes at all to take care and handle that epidemic. So that was the thought, like put a tax on the junk that's going to be causing all these problems because it's going to be needed to take care of everybody. But, that's, in Coke's eyes, that was seen as an extreme solution. So going back to that article, she wrote that Coca-Cola's intention was to promote best practices that are effective in terms of both policy and profit. And they're not even hiding what they're saying there. They're completely interested in their profit. That's no revelation. Of course, a massive corporation wants that. But when it's in these documents that they're saying their interest is profit, like they're not even trying to hide it, which is brutal. So corporations, going back to the article here now from Health News Review, corporations often deny self-serving motives when describing their funding of researcher and advocacy groups. So these documents would appear, they basically puncture any claim that Coke's funding was intended to advance the public interest. I think just from that term of promote best practices that are effective in terms of both policy and profit. I mean, they don't give a crap about the public. Basically, it shows that the company's financial support was meant to drive a specific narrative that was consistent with their marketing goals. So in 2015, back to this article in Health News Review, they contributed, they had a writer named Yanni Friedhoff, and he was an MD and had a role in exposing the whole Coke front group. There's another thing, you might have seen this. This is like one of those obscure things that shows up like on a Twitter feed news, scroll, that there was a big like diabetic convention or something to do with the medical community and diabetes. And it was funded by Coke. And they're walking in and there's a giant Coke sign and there's a refreshment table with like Coke and Sprite, and which is the biggest conflict of interest you could possibly imagine. So this Friedhoff, his take on the revelations is that it's business as usual for corporations. And though it's, again, what he says, there's nothing particularly surprising here. Corporations actively working towards protecting their brands and sales is what corporations do. The candor described is rarely seen, and it serves to provide basis to public health's conjecture the vested interests of industry aren't necessarily the best interests of public health. And he goes on to say, what's also worth noting is that by trying to create and fund an organization designed to be a weapon against public health and an advocate for policy change, Coca-Cola simply sought to actively finance those researchers whose known pre-existing beliefs supported the narrative least damaging to Coca-Cola's flagship brand of sugar water, which in turn makes their claims that they were not influenced by Coca-Cola more credible. So he actually says, there might be some people who weren't necessarily influenced by Coke and have maybe come up with this energy balance thing on their own. I've seen this a lot, and from smaller time, nutritionists or personal trainers, and they've just, obviously they're not being influenced or paid off or anything, but they've still promoted what I think is incorrect ways of insights into, energy balance, and that, it doesn't matter what you eat as long as it's in moderation and whatever. And they've, I guess along the way just sort of developed this idea, or they've just not been exposed to as much good information or research. So there is a chance, that some people who do end up having more of an influence and are able to have a broader reach are still able to promote some of these ideas. So not necessarily connected with Coke, but, a lot of these people and messages and platforms go back to companies like this. And he was showing a video of one of the founders of GEBN. And in the video, he's saying, this guy, I think his name's Dr. Stephen Blair, and he's saying there's really no compelling evidence blaming sugary drinks and fast food as the cause of obesity. And then when the camera kind of is moving back a little in the discussion, you can see cans of Coke and Sprite in the room. And I mean, I don't know how you can expect to have any credibility when that sort of thing happens. In the video, this same guy, this Stephen Blair, he's a University of South Carolina exercise science researcher, and he's that co-founder of the GEBN. And he argues that most of the folks in the popular media and the scientific press is, they're just going, they're eating too much, blaming fast food, blaming sugary drinks, and so on. And there's really virtually no compelling evidence that that, in fact, is the cause. And if you look at this video and if you listen carefully to this Stephen Blair, it's pretty clear that he's in sync with Coke's reframe message that fast foods and sugary drinks are not to blame for obesity. It's lack of exercise. So, I mean, I'll see if I can put this video up. I'm not sure if it's still around. If I'll put it up on the show notes again, regainedwellness.com/150. And it's, I mean, make your own conclusions, but it's hard not to think that this is a completely scripted answer, that Coca-Cola probably was involved in shooting the whole video, whether scripting, producing the whole deal, or at the very least influencing his words. So I don't know, interesting, but kind of winding down, and the rest of what's from this healthnewsreview.org report. In a separate essay published in Public Health Nutrition Journal, researchers analyzed how Coca-Cola disclosed or failed to disclose which of hundreds of clinical trials were funded by the company over a 4-year period. Most of the published research is focused on physical activity and disregards the role of diet in obesity. So that analysis revealed that among 389 articles published in 169 different journals involving 907 Coke-funded researchers, that Coca-Cola acknowledged funding just 42 authors, less than 5% of those it actually funded. I mean, I don't get it. If they're acknowledging they funded some, it's probably trying to say, like, we're not, we're being transparent. We are funding a few things, but it's still to cover up that much that they're only reporting 5% of what was actually funded is just, it's comical pretty much. So the report concluded that because Coca-Cola has not declared a comprehensive list of its research activities and the several authors appeared to have failed to declare receipt of Coke funding, the full scale of Coca-Cola's involvement is still not known. So we might not ever know how deeply Coca-Cola influenced science in the name of profit, but just getting reports like this, I mean, like 389 articles. I read a lot of articles. I read a lot of research. I have not read that many articles. And that's what just this report that healthnewsreview.org and Kathleen, this reporter, they've uncovered. It could go deeper. And this is just Coca-Cola. We're not even considering McDonald's, like those other things I said, Monsanto, J.D. Searle, Kellogg's, any of the big corporations. So that's potentially thousands. And I guarantee those, well, like I've said, we know some of those other companies are doing the same thing, whether it goes back all the way to big tobacco up to in the early 80s when aspartame first came on the scene, and J.D. Searle was, trying to calm the public's fear because you've got all these doctors and people that are horrified that this is now available for people to consume. So this is just Coca-Cola and how much they try to cover up and at the same time what they're involved in. So it comes back, I'll start wrapping it up here. What it comes back to is continuing to do your own research and taking things with a grain of salt. And if you're seeing articles or reports that seem a little, I don't know, a little too good to be true, there's probably a good chance there are. And especially when it comes to any of these things that can be connected to big companies like big soft drinks, fast food, whatnot, sugar, trans fats, high fructose corn syrup, where there's huge money involved with huge agencies and corporations. Now with this sort of report, you have a little more insight that, yeah, maybe this is a lot of crap. It looks legit. It is from legit sources, but you've got to do a little more digging and realize, maybe there's something a little more behind it. So I don't know. Hopefully I'll cut it off here. Hopefully find this interesting. I do. This stuff is just like baffling to me, as much as I know it exists, to see this, in black and white. I'll link the whole article up to the healthnewsreview.org report so you can see the whole thing if you want to look a little deeper, and I'll put that video up and the whole deal. So that'll be regainedwellness.com/150. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks for listening. I think this is worth listening to. I think it's, kind of peeling back the curtain a little bit and getting a little more. If this might be brand new information to you, and you might not know that this happens, so hopefully this has opened your eyes up a bit. Or if it's something you've been sort of aware of, it's a little deeper information and research and amazing reporting by all these people. So shout out again to healthnewsreview.org and all the people behind putting these reports together. So I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.